everyone. This week on Around the Coin, Brian Faisal and I dug into 5 different topics. We started with Apple Pay. We discussed Brian's research. He conducted research throughout California across 70-something merchants. Basically went out there and just watched how people used it and then reported back. It was really interesting. Learned some of the nuances of Apple Pay and some of the potential business opportunities along the way. Then we migrated into Etsy. Etsy and Square had a little bit of drama. Square launched Square Marketplace, which essentially was competing directly with Etsy. Etsy then in turn reached out, potentially, who knows what actually happened, tried to use a card reader for their merchants. Square said, sorry, no, we're not customizing anything for you. Then Square says, okay, lock it down. Etsy goes and builds their own Square card reader, essentially. It's the Etsy card reader. They're going to distribute this to all their merchants so they could go in person and not have to use Square. It's actually, will probably go down as one of the most interesting business decisions on Square's part. Some would argue not so wise, but we'll see. We moved into Tipalti. Tipalti is a company that not many people have heard of. They just raised their Series B, and Faisal digs into who they are, what they're doing, why they're interesting, and why you might want to know about them. Jumio is a bigger company. They raised $40 million, and they recently announced a product that really showed signs of desperation. What Jumio does is they're a credit card reader. So Card.io, acquired by PayPal, did a very similar thing where you hold up the credit card to your device, your computer, your phone, and it reads the credit card. It's nice. It's a good addition, but at the end of the day, it's a tough value proposition when Apple Pay comes into the market and you have your phone on your card already. So probably a little bit of disparity behind the scenes. We'll see. That's what Brian's perspective was. Last subject we touched was North American Bancard, which is interesting, and I really want to pull this in because this is something unlike any of the front headlining stories. It's a company, North American Bancard, started grassroots 20 years ago by selling merchant processing systems. The company grows up to now process $20 billion in payment processing, and no one talks about them. They're sort of the second tier. They're not consumer facing, so they're not as interesting. And they've really done some amazing things. They have about 250,000 merchants, which is just amazing. And they launched their own Pay Anywhere card reader. So again, this is going to be distribution is king. They launched their own card reader, distributed to all their merchants, essentially pushing Square out of the market again. You see the commonalities here. And they acquired a company, EPX, really in a consolidation play. EPX has been around for 33 years, and they essentially acquire merchant processing. So as you sort of see this consolidation, it's one thing we want to do is to constantly just let listeners become aware as to the complexity or the other sectors of the payment industry that are also fascinating. So let us know if you have any feedback, as always, and hope you enjoy. Thank you. All right, here we are for another episode of Around the Coin with Brian Faisal and Mike here. Good morning to everyone in the audience. Thank you for listening. And of course, just a reminder, if you have any suggestions, always leave them in the comment section of the posts on Quora. With that said, how are you guys doing? Brian, Faisal?
Wonderful.
Good morning. Doing good. Yourself?
Great. Yeah, I just got back from a quick trip. I live in Santa Monica and got back from a quick trip up in San Francisco. Went to the launch conference with the Jason Calcana show. That was really...
How was that?
It was fantastic. Jason always puts on a great event. Scale was the conference. It wasn't the typical launch conference, but it was really interesting. Some great presentations from Zirtual, CEO, and Hotel Tonight, among a bunch of others. But really the emphasis is on how to scale companies behind the scenes, operationally, technically. So really some good bits of nuggets of information that we were able to pull out of that one.
So since you guys are in the US and Apple Pay has launched, your experience so far, Brian, Mike, you want to jump in?
Yeah, Mike.
Sure.
Let's hear your
Sure, I can tell you about it. So It was interesting. The day it launched, we went with our CTO of Home Hero, August, down to the Apple Store on 3rd Street in Santa Monica, which is one of their biggest locations. I think aside from San Francisco, it might be their second or so.
Actually, I think it's the highest profitable Apple location in the United States.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible.
More than New York, actually. It's interesting.
Yeah.
As profitability, that's not net sales.
Yep, I believe it. The place is cranking. So we went in, and of course, I cracked my phone. I had the iPhone 5, so it was, time for me to upgrade. So I go in with August, who already had the 6, and he was buying some headphones and random things. And we went in the day it launched, and he purchased the headphones with Apple Pay, and when he did, I've never seen someone in the Apple Store get so excited. They were high-fiving him. They were euphoric for him even attempting to use Apple Pay. But when he did, I was right next to him, and it was just so easy. I mean, it was literally how you would imagine it to be after watching the Tim Cook example on the presentation there. But boy, you just go in and hold your finger right up to it. And that's it. I mean, there's really not much to talk about. It's
3 seconds is a maximum, right? 2 seconds, very quick. What headphones did he get? Beats?
Yeah, no, he has Beats. He just got the white. He just went with me as an excuse to buy something.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Did you go with the Plus or the standard?
I went with the standard. I'm a big runner, so I would struggle with not being able to bring the phone on the run. Unless the watch comes out and they could fulfill that need, which is where they're going. But right now, just the Plus is. I would love to have it. I think the it's an amazing device if you're not going to require to go on epic runs or have somewhere to be where you need to sort of be on the go and can't put it in your pocket. But yeah, I went with the standard 6.
So amazing experience that you witnessed there, huh?
Yeah, it really was. It was. Something I could see catching on to the mass market very quickly, only because there really is less to do than what already exists, right? When you take things away, I think you get a much quicker adoption curve than just replace them with something else, which always seems to be the case, right? That always is a typical answer to payment alternatives is don't use that card, use this card, don't use that app, use this app. This is just literally put your finger on the phone and you're done. So I give them a lot of credit.
It happens so quickly that a lot of people who have a technology background are shocked. They think that you need to do more. It's usually the consumer that's never done anything like this before that get it, in my observations.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking about is, I think there's very few companies who can launch with this and make it successful, aside from the user experience, just purely the business development deals that they had, right? I think in order to hit, mass market tipping point, you need to have thousands of merchants using it, right? Especially in densities in areas and cities where, you could just become accustomed to going in a place, a shop, wherever, and you pull out your phone and pay with Apple Pay. And being that they, what did they launch with, 300,000 locations?
Well, they started at 220,000. My research is pushing it just about 300,000 locations with research I'm doing. So it's quite large. The problem is it's hard to identify who has NFC and who doesn't. There's a lot of reporting barriers that hopefully will be solved.
But I think it's very similar to, kind of Amex, where there's many times I go in and I use my Amex by default and it gets rejected. They say, sorry, we don't accept American Express, and that's okay. You just take another card out. And I think it'll be the same sort of thing with Apple Pay for a while. You go in and you try the Apple Pay and they say, sorry, we don't have Apple Pay. And then they'll get enough requests and then they'll get it.
No doubt. I'll tell you, my experience has been actually better than I would have imagined. I mean, obviously, this is a long journey for me. Back 2010, I was really firmly starting to say that Apple's going to NFC, and everybody was like, NFC is dead, even in 2010. But it obviously, like you pointed out, their business development, which I go on to say is working with rather than against the existing payment system ecostructure, is really what's going on. There's so much wisdom in that, and it's so antithetical to the philosophical underpinnings that many startups are founded upon. And I hope that pendulum swings back to normalcy. It was erroneously contributing to the idea of disruption, that we're going to go out there and disrupt everything. You're not disrupting in payments simply because you're not replacing the existing infrastructure. Therefore, all you're going to do is enhance, extend, and embrace that infrastructure. And that's exactly what Apple did. And they did what they've done so incredibly well with iTunes, working with music industry, with movie industry, with the television industry, the book industry, not so much, but it's of course the telecommunications industry with the iPhone itself. This is master negotiations, and they did it even when they were not in a powerful position. Apple was not in a powerful position in the early 2000s. And Verizon to try to do a partnership on a phone.
Let me ask you
Apple
this.
Was a dying brand.
Brian, I'm curious. Somebody asked me this today, a couple days ago, and I didn't quite know the answers. They said, how long do you think Apple has been thinking about Apple Pay, and then how long have they been actively working on it?
That's a good question. I can tell you from my personal experience that Steve, being in payments, way back when he was putting together the 99-cent iTunes price model. Myself, included with a group of other payment experts, create this model. And Steve was so viciously upset over the way the payment card industry worked. One time I'm sure he entertained replacing it. I think that was quickly, in short order, discarded. But he had interest in it. And we could see through the patents that this started really most aggressively in 2008. This was, even just before the iPhone was released, there were patents that they were starting to look about NFC and payments. And then, of course, throughout the next number of years, the patents kept coming to the point of about 57 patents that are indirectly or directly related to payments and NFC. So the writing was on the wall. This was a long journey. I think from day one, that when they officially started it, which I would think is about 2010. I call it the official start date from the patents I've been researching and just the communications I've had inside the industry. The philosophy of working with rather than against, is really where that was developed. And I can tell you just from at this point, I guess I can talk about it. Some of the executives at Apple were really, I almost say they found it humorous the way a lot of, even PayPal, but certainly the payment startups were approaching the market. And you could see Tim Cook in the announcement of Apple Pay. He said, the difference between us is that you're not the product. We're not trying to use you as the way to make this thing profitable. We found another way to do it. And this is important because Apple and Apple Pay would never have been successful if you were the product. And that is, again, antithetical to what Google is doing. It's what Square was trying to do. I mean, obviously, they were trying to build with Square Wallet and the Square Merchant side, essentially data. And they even openly said, we're about big data. And that means you are the product. You, whether you're the merchant or the consumer, your data is going to be sold in some way. And the pendulum has swung, and Apple called that very early. So did Steve. I think Steve noticed very early on that people enjoy their privacy, even if they're going to essentially open their life out on social networks. They don't really want to be exposing themselves in their transaction environments. And that's why you've never seen Apple sell iTunes data in a way that would really upset people. And it's one of the reasons why Ping, the iTunes social network that everybody forgot about, fortunately, was not so successful because they were so against trying to loot your purchase history to try to make Ping a more pleasurable experience. And the times that they did do it, it just didn't go right. They were leaking out, well, I just bought this song onto your Ping followers, and people like, who cares?
So Brian,
so anyway, long story short, it's a long journey. But my experience in the first transactions, and by the way, I'm going to have a transaction in San Francisco in the next couple of weeks that I think is going to be symbolic. It'll be at a McDonald's at a very famous location.
Is this on the one? It's got to be what's the one right near the AT&T Park? It's like 4th and Folsom.
It's going to be at the bottom. it's gonna be at the bottom floor of the Square headquarters.
There you go. That's
About a dozen.
that'll be momentous for
If
you.
you've ever been there, the bottom story of Square headquarters has a number of merchants, and one of them is a McDonald's that is actively accepting Apple Pay. I did some research there. They've already clocked in some 350 transactions in the first week, or this first open week of.
Wow.
I imagine most of those people are Square employees that are testing it out. It is, in fact, the closest NFC location or Apple Pay location to Square. And the symbolic nature is Square didn't recognize early enough that Apple would become involved in payments. And although today it doesn't look like it conflicts with their direction, it certainly did when they had Square Wallet. And there was a tremendous amount of time, talent, and money invested in that.
We want to see a picture here. If you don't take a picture, it didn't happen. So we want a hand on the phone while it's going through.
Yeah,
It was actually invited. I was actually invited by somebody in the media to actually do this. So it's forming, it's shaping and forming right now. And a couple of my VC friends who I cannot officially talk about might actually raise their head there and become official in our relationships. So it actually might turn into be a media event. I'm going to invite Jack and Sarah and anybody else downstairs who wants to hang out. And,
nice, man.
Experience this.
That'll be fun.
Yeah,
When's the date on that one?
It's not being firmed up yet.
Okay.
I'm leaving in the hands of this media guy who is a very top writer about it. He just contacted me this weekend because I was actually joking last week that my first transaction is going to be, and I put out the address, and a few people figured out where it was, and it cracked up. I got to say, if you've ever been a part of San Francisco, it's not exactly the bottom floor of that whole area is not exactly the nicest place on the planet. So
yeah.
That's all I could say.
How does the well, are you going to go to a stadium next? I saw your post around Major League Baseball and Apple Maps.
Mind blowing. Holy cow. Yeah, Major League Baseball and MasterCard have embraced Apple Pay. I mean, that's the whole thing about this. By inviting the ecosystem to partner with you, they synergistically expand the use cases of the things you invented. Simple, right? Very simple. Try to explain that to a startup founder that was spoon-fed disruption. Right? No, I'm going to do it myself. We're going to grow big fast and break things, and we're going to do the same things that Zuckerberg did. No, you aren't. That's a once in a lifetime type of scenario, and you're not going to do that in payments. You do it by working with people. So you have Major League Baseball. Apple had nothing to do with this promotion. Major League Baseball and MasterCard get together, and they filmed a series of commercials. They completely branded the entire, World Series stadiums and et cetera about using Apple Pay. And the brilliance here is Apple paid not a dime for this promotion. The commercial has been seen by during the World Series games, and of course, people who have attended at the stadium.
Brian, say that number again. How many people? It cut out for a second.
Probably over 100 million from what my media friends are telling me already with the MasterCard commercials. So that is a massive commercial that Apple paid not a dime for. That's the brilliance of working with people and not working against them. That's the brilliance of sharing with an existing ecosystem rather than trying to quote unquote disrupt it, even though you're not going to disrupt it. And this is, you've probably heard me say this so often in the show. And I don't think you can get more clear. Now, you might argue that Square couldn't have done that. Absolutely bullshit. Square could have done it. At the height of Jack Dorsey's stardom, when Square was really taking off, they could have got a consensus of payment system professionals, retailers, and other types of entities to sit down at a table and create a way to change payments. And if that took place, Apple Pay would look different today, and Apple Pay would be integrated within Square, maybe even to the point where Square would be an Apple subsidiary. So
that's powerful.
Unfortunately, yeah, this I made very clear. I made that clear in 2010 when I had, unofficial meetings with executives at the company. I go, that your ultimate game plan is to work with the people who make the land, the landowners, people who make the product. You are never going to own that land ever. You can never own that handset. If you believe that Apple is going to dominate, which is what they believed, the next logical step is, will you ever own that handset? No. Then you need to partner with them in some way. And if you can't partner, you need to understand where they're going. And if you don't understand where they're going, you're going to be left out. And that's where they are today.
Let's change gears a little bit and get into the Etsy.
Well, I got to give you one couple of my experiences with Apple Pay before I get off that thing. I've actually performed 71 transactions since the announced date. I've loaded over 51 credit cards, or payment cards, if you will, even though currently the secure element within the iPhone 6 series appears to only hold maybe 27 cards.
Why would you have 51 credit cards? Who are you?
I actually have more than that.
Why do you have so many? The master of all credit cards.
Catch me if you can. I tell you, it's an obsession. I'm like a Imelda Marcos of credit cards.
You better have those on auto pay, otherwise you spend all your time paying those bills.
Here's the funny thing. The only cards I will use, because I've been training myself, is cards that will pay me bonuses and points that are immeasurably high. American Express, I'm not endorsing officially. American Express most definitely pays the highest points of any card available. And what I mean by that is that those points can be converted into a lot of other things other than just the air miles. For example, if you have an airline card for American Airlines, for example, primarily the only thing you can collect from there is something directly from an American airline or American airline partner. American Express actually allows you to buy air travel from anybody. So I have a lot of cards because I am in the payment industry. I'm constantly trying different products out.
Plus, they're free. You can sign up. Some of them don't charge you.
Early on, almost none of them except American Express and a few of the premium cards have an annual fee. And I ultimately see that as a cost of being in this industry. I even have a Plum card, which, the product spectacularly failed for American Express. But when one of my companies, here's a funny thing, when one of my companies got on the Inc. 500 list, I think we got to 22 or something like that.
What company is this?
American Express. I'm trying to remember. I have about half a dozen companies. I think it was First American. So, one of the things when you get on the Inc. 500 list as one of the bonuses is it's very much like getting invited to the Oscars or whatever. You get sort of a welcome kit. And they get better every year. Over the very first time I was on the Inc. list, it was kind of small, it was an envelope. Recently, last 5 years, the kit gets really large. It's all kinds of people that want to do business with you. They certainly want to sell you plaques and placards and things like that. You can hang around your business. Anyway, an executive, literally, at American Express called every single one of the top 200 Inc. 500 members and told them about a new credit card that they're inventing. It was phenomenally interesting to me because I'm in that industry. And then when he called, I said, this is brilliant. Let's talk about it. And we had ongoing conversations. And Plum Card had some great ideas. So what they did is they gave you the card. They gave you an original master, I guess, which shows you what number you are of the card holder. I was number 6 or number 5. I don't remember. And it's frameable. It's almost like an animation gel, if you will. It's funny. Each one of the original cards were printed a little different, and et cetera. That fell apart. But in any case, it was a great marketing system. It did give a lot of awareness to American Express. They later tried to guide you into the American Express small business cards. So that's one of the reasons why I had a card like that. That annual fee was originally, I think, 0, but now they're trying to knock it up.
Okay, so you have 51 cards loaded up in the phone.
Well,
you're maxing out Apple Pay.
Apple Pay maxes out at 8 cards. All right. So here's what happens. First off, as for us nerds, you don't need to do anything with your phone when you approach an NFC terminal. Apple has 2 bands of detection. The very first band of detection is if you're within 3 feet to 2 feet of an NFC terminal, your screen will come up with the Apple Pay designated card. As you move that card to the terminal, the fingerprint sensor comes on. This is very important two-step. Nobody's noticed this. So the fingerprint sensor comes on, and then when you get close enough, which is typically for most payment card terminals, is about 2.5 inches. You press your thumb or whatever. Generally, you should be using your thumb, and the transaction takes place. I'm doing about 5 research studies on Apple Pay. One of them is use case studies, and the typical transaction time is about 3 seconds, between 3 seconds and 2 seconds, between that range. It is magically fast for most people. We've discovered that there are over 300,000 locations in our study. We're going to be getting much more finite on that. Apple doesn't even know that. It's notoriously difficult since there is no official reporting system. There's nothing in place right now. If I were to sell you an NFC terminal as a merchant, I don't have to report that you have an NFC terminal. There's nothing that does that. Now, some of the payment networks like First Data and Chase Payment Tech do keep some of the information, but it's not cohesive and it's not centralized as we speak. But so in either case, you go up to an NFC terminal. The operator, the person at the register doesn't have to know anything. I mean, they just know that their screen says you paid or you didn't. And frankly, in my tests, 71 odd transactions, most of them were at businesses that are not on Apple's list. These are smaller and medium-sized regional businesses around the country where I was the only person that came in. And I didn't even know they had NFC. I mean, again, my mapping system, I've been able to detect this. I walk in, do a transaction. I said, what did you just do? How did that happen? Because in a lot of cases...
Wait, let me ask you that. So you have a mapping system to detect NFC devices nearby?
Yeah, I have a number of different systems. It sounds very high tech. It's very actually kind of low tech.
Okay. I'm picturing you walking around.
But I do.
I'm picturing Brian walking around like the metal detector guy at the beach. You ever see those guys at the beach with the metal detectors? You're walking around like that, looking at a device.
You're not far away. You're not far away here because you want to know what I carry around. I carry around a spectrum frequency analyzer sometimes.
Who doesn't?
And this thing is old school. And I've been detecting iBeacon signals coming out of iOS devices, Apple 6 series phones, while you're doing an NFC transaction. So it spits out, and this is probably the first time anybody's heard this publicly because nobody's talking about it. When you are doing an NFC transaction, currently Passbook spits out an iBeacon or an iBeacon signal, and in that signal is an ID number. So we're already seeing the beginning of what Apple Pay 2.0, 3.0 is going to do with iBeacons, and we'll talk about that in the show. I know we've covered it. So anyway, the operator doesn't really need to know anything. You don't really need to go into Passbook to do a transaction. It comes up automatically when you're in range. If Passbook doesn't come up when you're in front of a customer-facing terminal, it doesn't have NFC active. Period. That's as simple as that. If the NFC radio is on, Passbook comes up. It's very binary. If it doesn't come up, there's nothing you need to do. There's nothing you did wrong. There's nothing they need to do. NFC on customer-facing devices is always on. It's always on. It's always producing, let's call it a beacon signal of NFC saying, I'm here. You can't do anything with that signal until it goes into the next phase, and that is the recipient terminal will ask for a return signal, and that will complete the transaction. The dance that it takes is actually quite interesting. I won't get into it, the minutia, but for nerds, you might want to study it. It's very interesting how an NFC signal sets up and how the transactions take place. And a lot of people think you have to go to an Apple Pay terminal. No. Anything that has an NFC logo on it, even terminals that are from the 2002 era, the very first useful. In fact, Apple uses a Vivotech customer-facing device in all their images. So it's a very fast process.
Any quick takeaways? Like, are there any high-level takeaways? Did you think it was, easier to use than you thought it would be? Do you think that there was any obstacles? Did you witness any demographics that were particularly interesting?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I got to use it earlier than the official launch date. I can't go too far into it, but a lot earlier unofficially. But the official version really raised the hairs on the back of my neck, because I've been a payments nerd for my entire life, Apple nerd, a patent reader, and studying this stuff empirically. And when I did the first transaction, I was actually blown away. I mean, I was there with a couple of my friends, my wife, and they're like, "This is exactly what you were talking about." And it's like, yeah, we've seen NFC before. Everything, the experience, the finite detail of how Apple worked this with the sounds and the way it vibrates the phone, the confirmation. These are a lot of the errors that the other wallet companies, the startups that were creating wallets, just simply forgot to do. And it's brilliant. And so some of the interesting stories: 91-year-old grandma, right
Your
there in
grandma?
LA. No, I wish it was. Nope. My grandma's not around. But
Okay.
she was going into a drugstore at a location I was doing some study at, and she went in there and had a new iPhone 6. I believe it was. Yeah, it was a Plus. I'm going to look at my notes here. But in either case, she went in there and made a collection of stuff in a basket, did a purchase, and I was there watching, with permission, Apple Pay transactions. And she was one of the first transactions for that day. It was the same day that Apple Pay was announced. She knew exactly what was going on. I later found out that her son was in technology and apparently works at Apple, so it's not a surprise that this happened. But what was interesting is how fluid and how instantaneous the transaction was. She didn't fumble. She had her phone in her hand. Again, in most of my studies, it turns out that to the 85 percentile, in most cases, it's even higher, people already have their phone in their hand. So it's not reaching for a purse or wallet, whatever. Women, it can be almost 40 seconds to
That's
get to
impressive.
payments. Yeah, so she has it in her hand. She holds it over there, takes it away. The entire transaction was 7.3 seconds, and the entire experience was 7.3 seconds. The Apple Pay piece was 2.7 seconds, and the operator didn't even know what happened. This particular operator just come on, didn't even know about Apple Pay, and she walked away smiling. I talked to her and I said, "You just did Apple Pay?" And she goes, "Yes, I did." And she said she loved it, and this is how she wants to pay forever. She literally does not want to have to take another credit card out. And it turns out that that's what everybody says when they first try this. It is literally a magical experience. To us payment nerds, we're like, oh my God, it's old NFC technology. It's not a big thing. It's been around for a while.
It's all about the experience,
Wow.
right?
Yeah. It's all
right,
about the experience. And so my takeaway is, wow, Apple hit it out. Congratulations to them.
I'm sure we'll learn more about Apple Pay as the days go along.
I got to ask you quickly though, Faisal.
Yeah.
Out in your region, is it a lot of just, I wish we had it, or is it a lot of just sort of pensive, like, what's the big deal?
Well, it's it's a big deal, but it's more of us sitting on the fence and with the guitar in the hand and singing, wishing you were here.
Faisal.
It's we'll get to play with it when the time comes. But moving on, Etsy released the dongle for payments, pretty much a clone of Square. Your thoughts on that?
Wow. Yeah. In another time and universe.
First, let me ask you: good move or good move or bad move on Etsy?
Brilliant. Absolutely.
Because Etsy's a relatively small. It is a relatively small market,
Yeah, it's a brilliant move on the part of Etsy, and I can just say, in a the many worlds theory of physics says that every possibility could happen, and in another world, in another universe, Square should have done everything in its power to partner with Etsy, and the fact that it didn't happen, and what did happen took place, is going to be, I think, one of the best studies for business for probably a long time. I hope it becomes a study. If not, I'll make it into one.
So Etsy, this is really just a dongle and an app. I mean, is there anything other than that? They're essentially doing what Square did.
There's a lot. it's
Sure, but at a high
Luna,
level,
see,
you know,
there's a lot-
from the user experience, there's now a dongle that's orange and says Etsy on it, and then there's the app I download. And when I go to a farmer's market, when I go to a meetup with my friends to exchange Etsy products, I can use the Etsy app and the dongle.
Well, it's a lot more. It's a lot more to it than that. Etsy is an inventory system for a lot of these micro merchants, and what they're doing is they're taking whatever they have on the internet, which is already there. They're not having to reload anything, and they're bringing it into their smartphone for face-to-face retail. Now, here's where the history. And I hope I don't want this to be a dump on Square show, but the history would have been for Square never to open up Square Market, which will be canceled. I go on record that at some point in next 2 years, Square Market will be discontinued. It was a waste of time, talent, and money. I call it one of the abstractions and distractions the company had investigated. And a lot of people say, well, that's what startups do. They make No, the good startups don't do that. Good startups look at the world and they look at the empirical aspects of what is really working. They really study it and they look at history and they put it all together and they reinvent the future based on what it had. In a perfect world, would never have opened up Square Market. They would have opened up Square Reader to partnerships in 2010. They probably might do it in 2015, but it's way too late. Wanted to work with Square, and the last thing Square ever wanted to do was work with the entire world. And so I can just tell you, just from anecdotal information, that there may have been interest for Etsy to work with Square, and Square may have decided not to do that. Adding insult to injury, they went after Etsy and created Square Market. Now, you may not get officially Square to admit that, but look at the vendors that they chose. If you look at a posting I did in Quora, one very notable vendor who makes these incredible iPad and iPod cases and iPhone cases, been doing it for a long time, a big Etsy seller. Square targeted that seller and moved him on to Square Market. If you look at the difference of the user experience online, it was quite dramatic. The Etsy experience was much better because Etsy is trying to get you to know the artist and artisan. Square didn't get that aspect. Why most people fall in love with Etsy is the quirky nature of the things you can buy there, but the quirky nature of knowing the people who have made it. The reason you and I, and certainly the demographic that it's targeted to, fall in love with Etsy is because we fall in love with the artist and artisan. It's about the people.
So did Square launch the marketplace essentially competing directly with Etsy? Etsy realized
Absolutely.
this and then built their own
Square Card Reader.
Square Card
Yes.
Reader.
And anybody asserting that something else happened is living in fantasy land.
How else
Etsy
could
would have
this have gone down? Would Square not have built marketplace and partnered with Etsy and just admitted that this is not their place to play?
Exactly. Because, listen, you start going down, I mean, God, for God's sakes, you're in food delivery. All right, another thing that's a waste of time. Let's take a couple of steps back. If I was in a position of changing the world of payments, like Jack and Keith and all the founders of Square, the brilliant position they were in, you only have two choices. Either you work with everybody or you work against everybody. They took the latter. They went against everybody. The proper thing to do, that we've now learned empirically, there's no doubt about it, would have been to work with everybody. They would have had a business development team that's reached out to everybody, and especially people like Etsy, and say, listen, we have synergies. We'd like to have the inventory you have up there come into our API and come down into a retail app. We'll power that. We'll share. We'll work together, and we'll, powered by Square, powered by Etsy, however you'd want to work it, and we'll make it synergistically much more than either one of us could have done alone. And that would have necessitated Square never to create Square Market. It would have allowed Square to focus on the things that they do best. They don't do Square Market best. Etsy does Square Market best. It's a clone. There's no other way to look at it. You might argue, well, it's not just artists and artisans. There's a $3,000 bicycle that they were selling there. Stuff like that. No, it was directly targeted at eBay, some Amazon sellers, and definitely Etsy sellers. So what's the sum total of what's going to happen now? I mean, that was the past. we can cry over it. But moving forward, what's the sum total? The sum total strategically is Square is going to lose a reasonably large sector of business type. And that is any of these artists and artisans that already have inventory on Etsy are going to be faced with a fork in the road themselves. That fork in the road is, do I duplicate my inventory for Square Reader, Square Market, Etsy Reader, or do I pick one? Which one do I pick? Let's see. Where am I selling most of my goods? Etsy. Okay, the reader is exactly the same price, same experience, and it downloads my inventory. No brainer. You're going to lose that merchant.
Yeah, people don't use Etsy for the payment. People aren't using the platform for the payments.
It's a marketplace.
Yeah,
it's a
exactly. I mean, if your payment's easier, that's nice, but definitely not required.
It's the same reason we use Uber. It's the same market, and it's the same thing see, the reason why you work with everybody, right? I wasn't predicting the rise of Uber in 2010 when I sat down unofficially with these people. I was predicting the fact that payments are going to be wrapped up into a final product where payments become irrelevant, and that if you're not working with everybody, you're going to be standing there alone, and then you're going to have to try to duplicate it. So what did they do?
Who did Etsy use as a under the hood?
I can't get into detail, but I can tell you this: when it finally is official, who they're partnering with, it's going to be very illuminating. The differences of philosophy that were involved. So again, this is not to say Square is at a dead end in life. It is a wake-up call. If all of these things that took place over the last couple of years did not wake you up, the Etsy scenario should wake you up. If you're hearing my voice and you're a Square employee, wake up. It's an open company. Start talking about this. Save the company. Move them in a direction where it makes sense. It does not make sense to compete with who are going to be potentially partners. All right. So Etsy is going to wind up taking back a significant portion of these businesses. Now, some people might argue they're micro merchants. That's right. That's a primary business case for Square. Some might argue they do low volume. That's right. That's a primary business case for Square. And some might argue that not very many sell retail. That's absolutely incorrect. A vast majority of Etsy merchants were using Square at retail sales, farmers market, trunk shows, home shows, all sorts of types of sales. The number, Etsy doesn't like talking about official numbers here, but I can derive some of these. And I can tell you that the potential of face-to-face transactions with these micro merchants that are Etsy merchants are huge. I would say they are easily a multi-billion-dollar industry on a monthly basis.
Wow.
And this is coming from primarily the demographic are women who are artists and artisans. They're crafty. They're making things. This economy is not going anywhere. It's growing. And they're merging with what we are seeing within the Pinterest community, the merging of Etsy, Pinterest, crafts, artists and artisans is exploding. And Etsy has positioned itself in the right area.
Okay,
the one thing...
Let's pull in. I'm curious, Faisal. Let's pull you in a little bit. What do you think? What's your takeaway here? Are you excited by this?
You got something going up.
I don't think Faisal slangs too much Etsy product, but what do you think about that?
No, but I'm it's a very learning experience for me that I'm learning that Etsy does have an offline. The Etsy merchants have an offline retail market. That they have a physical presence market. It's something you don't think about much. You pretty much look at Etsy and you think they're just selling online and that's it. I didn't think about the farmers market or the trunk shows.
It is
antique
huge.
Shows.
Yeah.
But even still, I'm thinking how many merchants? 100,000, 200,000, 500,000.
Millions.
Really?
Yeah. If in the United States, let's call them weekend shows, right? We can call them flea markets. There's over 45,000 at any given time.
I'm very familiar with flea markets, but I'm just thinking, are all the people who are currently selling on Etsy?
Oh, not all of them. No.
What's that percentage? A third?
25% at average in the United States are actively selling. And Etsy, by promoting this, might actually liberate to 1/3. It's certainly not 1/3, but at this point. But I think it will get that way. The idea is
so I think your strategy just makes sense. I mean, it will come down to the fork in the road. Do I go Square? Do I go Etsy? And
But the thing is,
loyalty and retention at the end of the day.
yeah, because the thing is, these are not generally the demographic they're reaching to. These are not high technologically cutting edge individuals. They're not Silicon Valley startup people. So it's very hard for people at startups, and especially 25-year-olds that are working at startups who are doing the research, saying, "Oh, don't worry about it, boss. We'll open up Square Market and we'll kill them." Again, not doing the empirical research and not having domain experience makes these mistakes.
I think one can easily say, and I can say it since I'm not in the US and they can't sue me, I think Square's had way too many fuck-ups, way too many. And it's pretty evident. Pardon for my French, but I think that word was very necessary.
I think it's more German, but
But having said that, do you see Etsy's dongle coming mainstream for non-Etsy merchants?
I don't think that's their game plan. I don't think that Square needs to worry about that. They need to worry about Amazon. Amazon, despite all of its financial woes and the Fire Phone failing, Amazon's competing service is really, really creating attrition over at Square. I care not whether they're going to officially recognize that. I have a number of ways to determine that in research, and it's happening. And PayPal, the independent PayPal.
It wasn't long ago we were so gung ho about the Fire Phone, and it just everything seemed just so right with it. And then the investors call, and then they said, they're writing it off.
That's a huge
really
write-off,
that's amazing to me. So they're really
99 cents. They took it down to 99 cents.
They can't give it away.
Wow.
I mean, you can't give it away, seriously. And then I think it's $170 million write-off or something.
Wow.
It's my whole problem.
Even Amazon
with
makes mistakes.
Well,
Yeah.
are very quick to recover. I mean, look how quickly they took this right down. A lot of companies will take it another 3 or 4 quarters. They just said, no, that's it. I think when iPhone 6 came out, they knew it. There's no way you're going to compete. I mean, again, the whole thing is why you're devising that phone. Again, if you're not trying to make the best possible experience for your user, you're probably going to miss it. You're going to miss the whole thing. But getting back to Etsy, I don't see Etsy going into the world of, now let's go head to head with Square. But I do see them expanding into markets that nobody would have guessed that they would move into tangentially because of this. I believe that their primary mission is very simple and is very logical. They didn't want to do payments themselves. They're not a payment company. They're not working to build all this stuff. They wanted the partner. And when you turn your cold shoulder, no matter how new you are as a startup, I tell any startup, whoever you are, I don't care how small you are, find somebody with sales experience day one, and don't treat them like a jerk. Find a good guy, let them answer the phone, actually publish a phone number on your website, get that in your mind day one. If you can't answer the phone, don't go into the
Brian,
business.
it comes down, no one, at least I wasn't. I know a lot of people, no one was expecting Etsy to do that. What they did,
I could tell you that when I wrote in 2013.
You're probably working for them, but everyone. Mike didn't know about it. Mike, did you?
Well,
know?
in 2013,
No.
In 2013,
This is a total surprise.
In 2013, when they came out with Square Market, I wrote a piece on Quora that said that all they've done is agitated Amazon, agitated eBay, and agitated Etsy, and they will not ever dominate in this market. Strategically, if you study, even if you want to study, Zen masters or whatever, you can go any philosophical debate you want. You don't enter into a market unless you feel you can fully dominate it. You don't go, especially a company like Square.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
If I was in that meeting, I'd say, can you dominate this market? Hands up. If everybody there said they can dominate it, I'd fire them and start all over again, because you can't dominate that market. It's too late. If it was 2003, damn straight they can dominate that market.
Faisal, let me ask you. I know prior to the show we were talking about some topics here. One of the ones that doesn't get enough credit, I think, is the announcements that are not sort of mainstream companies that people hear about every day. There's a company called Tipalti that raised $13 million recently, based out of Israel. They have an office, I believe, in Palo Alto, led by CEO Chen Amit. What do you think about the company? Is it going long?
This
Are you a believer?
this is a really, absolutely sold long on it. Tipalti is a very small company, but very intelligent. They have their focus right. They're developing a payment rail system, a payment network connecting the major markets of the world. They were previously riding on Citibank's infrastructure, and I believe it was HSBC, although I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But predominantly Citibank. To terminate business payments in many countries. I think they were doing about 60, 70 countries. They are also applied for money transmitter licenses in the US. They have in application, I believe. I could be wrong on this thing, but to the best of my knowledge, I think they have. And they are now building their payment rails for US, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, London, the EU. And if you want to do business payments, this is the network you go to. They're competing against the likes of Earthport, which is a pretty big financial network, TNSI, and the others. So it's a small company that's gaining traction and gaining business.
It's a big market, right? I mean, there's really
Business
few.
payments is.
So they said they have a.
What you're seeing in the business payments. So what you're seeing in the business payments market is aggregation makes a lot of sense. So rather than saying one business payment goes across and we charge $25 for it, okay, so we have to send 50 transactions to India. Let's just bunch them all, single transaction, $25, and then break it up in India.
Wow.
So you're leveraging your own network, and it makes the payments cheaper for everyone, for your business customers, or you make a better profit, et cetera, et cetera.
What's the speed of their system? I mean, how quickly can I move money within their system?
So if they're not taking the risk, which I'm assuming they're not, so it's based on the Swift payment rails or using FX brokers,
Sure.
which is basically about emerging markets, and I'd say about a day and a half, 2
Now,
days.
do you envision that part of their plan? Because I've heard this, that there are in some transactions taking risk and almost doing instantaneous type of movement.
So instantaneous movement would have to be a customer that has already been cleared for, due diligence has been
Sure.
done on them, because it's essentially prepaying on the other end. So if they have control over the funds, i.e. they know that the funds are in their institution, in their bank, they will prepay in Israel or Hong Kong, for example, based on a very, very small financial charge. Because the funds are already with them, there's no risk. So all that they're doing is just borrowing money from the payout bank and paying it out over there. So I don't think so they'll be doing a credit risk anytime soon. They will only do a payout once the funds have been confirmed. They will short circuit the cycle for the actual transfer. So if the transfer takes a day and a half, they say, okay, fine, now that the funds are in my US bank account, I will release the money to you in London right now.
So is that the nature of their business? Essentially, the value proposition being move money throughout large-scale I mean, they say they have 100 paying customers with 300,000 payees.
So they typically would go after the companies like, let's say, Caterpillar or Boeing, and say, okay, so Mr. Boeing or Mr. Caterpillar, you have payout locations in 30 countries and with 400 vendors. Let us take care of those payments, so that's what they do. So Caterpillar would just send them the request, here's the money, go pay out, and they do the payouts in all the countries.
Wow.
Wow, handling $1.5 billion annually.
Off the radar screen, though.
Which is no. Tipalti is
in the US.
making waves.
In the U.S., a lot of people just don't even know they exist. It's funny.
Well, so the U.S. is a pretty darn large market. So yeah, but they're coming up slowly. This is a company to watch out for.
Jumio, you've definitely researched this market about imaging of payment cards. Jumio has come out very aggressively with an anti-Apple Pay or Apple Pay alternative. What's your view on this?
So Jumio's known more for AML KYC identification imaging technology. So this is a complete surprise. I mean, if I had to say it bluntly, it almost shows desperation.
Yeah.
But
doesn't it feel that way? The marketing.
But I guess what they're trying to. It would have been easier for me to digest it if they said, listen, we have now the imaging technology for card payments. And not going into the card payments business themselves. And I think that would be a better option, because and I think it stems from the vacuum left by Card.io being acquired by PayPal, I think 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's where everyone was stumbling. Who's the next company that's going to make the imaging technology for card payments? And everyone had thought it was pretty much dead until the Apple Pay thing came in, and now everyone wants it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I see Jumio as well. I thought, when I first saw the imaging show up in iTunes, Apple started testing imaging. It was almost 2 years ago on their own cards, and I actually there was a version of iTunes that came out and that was replaced very quickly. That actually was imaging credit cards, and it. I couldn't get a screen capture, and the next thing I did a replacement and it didn't work. But I knew Apple was going that direction, and then I think in the summer they started pointing it out. I really thought an Android company, maybe a Samsung, would have invested or purchased them. Certainly the identification system is.
I mean, the ID
good.
ID side, they're pretty. The identification cards are not going to disappear anytime soon. So
Sure.
that physical element of that identification will remain. The passports will remain. They'll become more digital, but they'll remain. The state-issued ID card will remain, and so forth. The credit cards, not so, because the credit cards are morphing into now the phone itself, which is morphing from a channel to a payment instrument. So I think the imaging technology is something that has a very limited market, because fast forward 10 years, I don't think so. We'll be getting cards issued per se, physically mailed. That may be an option, but VCT is already here. Virtual card technology. You can go apply, hit enter, and boom, you get a card number issued to you. Put it into your phone app, and you have a card up and running. So no need for an imaging technology here.
Faisal, do you need anything on the checkout side? Does a merchant need anything? Do they have to possess any hardware in order to use this?
I'm sure the payment rails would have to support it. The back-end POS system would have to somehow recognize that a payment has been made. It may come down to that company, I forget its name, the one that made a coil, an antenna that basically mimicked the Mac card.
Loop.
Yeah, exactly, Loop. So I think they just may be going somewhere along that direction. But again, that's a very limited market because terminals are changing. So hard to predict this one. Really, I think that this is a product that's been taken off from the shelf, dusted, cleaned, and put back on the website.
Yeah.
I mean, the company raised $37 million, right? So it's not any sort of trivial amount. And I know Card.io was a small team. I have to imagine their acquisition was for sub 20 million.
Yeah,
I don't think
close.
So the thing that's a big problem now with digital technology and digital payments is the regulators are clamping down on KYC. The ID is still a physical document. The common denominator now being that you have the cameras on all the phones, on all the laptops, etc., and everyone typically has an access to a camera. If you can show your ID to a camera, a passport to a camera, and it can identify it as being the authentic document, there is a big discount you get, let's say, from a risk perspective of the financial institution that is underwriting you as far as KYC is concerned. So I think that's where this company's main stronghold will remain. They may be able to ID an American passport or an American license pretty well. What happens when you bring an Australian passport? What happens when you bring an Indian passport? And this is the kind of technology that they would then like to export to other countries, to other financial institutions, and say, listen, hey, we have a ever-present technology. Simply put up your ID in front of the camera and we'll do a KYC on you. You don't need to walk into a physical bank branch and submit for Xerox copies or what have you. The technology is here to stay, and we have that technology. So I think that's where they really have a strong foothold of identifying via the camera the authenticity of the identification document.
I agree. I think this is unfortunately another abstraction and distraction, and it reeks of sort of desperation to some regard because the timing, the anti-Apple message, trying to create FUD, fear and uncertainty about Apple Pay. It just, it's
Brian, it smells more like this product was probably ready when Card Pay was there.
Yeah.
It sort of saw its market diminish because NFC wasn't coming up and everything else wasn't, I mean, they didn't see any movement with the big players as far as imaging technology for card reading was concerned. And they said, you know what, we have the product, let's just take it off. And they put it, they probably shoved it back in a storeroom or digital storeroom, so to speak, on the shelf. And when this Apple Pay thing, they said, you know what, hey, go bring it back,
That's not the right way to launch.
Well, that's what I would think. I mean, do you really think that they had this product 8 months prior and they were researching and working on it? I don't think so.
Doesn't feel that way. I do want to touch on another subject that was very interesting. Thank you, Faisal. This one kind of going along the lines of talking about companies that don't necessarily get front page publication, I should say, among the typical Bay Area conversations. Brian, you have built some amazing companies in the payment processing networks, and there's still a bit of ambiguity across the board as to how that even occurred. Not you personally, but just payment processing, I feel, is not a very well understood segment of payments, right? The consumer-facing products are the easiest to understand, and as you go deeper, it gets more complex and convoluted, frankly. And with this announcement, North American Bancard acquires Electronic Payment Exchange, EPX. Not many people would know how to digest this, what it means. We look at these numbers, and the companies are processing $18 billion. So clearly there's a lot going on. Sure. They partner with and own Pay Anywhere, which is essentially a mobile point of sale solution, a Square competitor, right? And they have the distribution to make it really, really interesting. What is this deal? How should people interpret this? I mean, is this a big deal? Do these kind of things happen every day? How does money change hands? Is there, now a new player in the space that people should be aware of?
Well, great insights. The iceberg, analogy is probably the best thing I can utilize. Certainly for a lot of good reasons, star companies and star startups will gain 99% of the headlines, and you will hear announcements of doing a few million here, a few billion there, and it sounds like it's a really big number.
Sounds like it's a lot. North American Bancard was processing $16 billion with 250,000 merchants. Who are they? I mean, you must know them very well.
Oh yeah, I know very. Mark Gardner is really quite an icon in our industry. He started in Flint, Michigan, has not moved out, and this is a guy that's a scrappy street guy. Was a salesman, worked his way up, and built a phenomenal company. He's well loved and hated within the industry because competitors compete. But I think you can say some very glowing things about what he built in a part of the country that has absolutely no love. I mean, there was no support for this guy. There was no love for what he was doing, even in Flint.
So did he ride the early payment trains of when credit cards first coming out, merchant processors first coming out? He went out and just hustled and got a ton of merchants, got a bunch of salespeople.
Physically, and I love people like this because they physically went out and did stuff. I'm old-fashioned that way, but he actually went out there and was a sales guy, and he went out there working the streets of Michigan selling merchant accounts.
He really did.
And took a lot of bruises in those early days and worked his way up the channel. I mean, he was in those early days when people just heard about electronic payments. We're talking, in the 1980s. And he built North American into a phenomenally large company. And he was the first company to react to Square and took them face to face and competed with them on features and price. Now,
Pay Anywhere is Pay
Anywhere and Phone Swipe are both products of their company.
Yeah, it's a clean looking site and product.
Now they have a free. They give you a free tablet. They give you a free stand. They give you a free card reader, and it's $12.95 a month and 1.69%. No transaction fee. Compare that to 2.75%. It's hard for a company like Square to compete with that when you have, what do they have? 75,000 indirect salespeople on the street. This is a magic of building. Not trying to let things sell itself. You sell through the sales channel, and I see them more often than not gaining a lot of ground. So why did they acquire EPX? Well, EPX, a company founded in 1979 in Delaware. We're talking a very old company, and they have been around. The founders have been around for a very, very long time, doing not anything remarkable other than selling merchant accounts. But very early on, they started inventing something called buyer wall, which is a tokenization system way before Visa and MasterCard had created tokenization. And they allowed what we would now call marketplace sites to utilize this system. And they did very, very well. They were not necessarily setting the world on fire until, the 2000s started coming around, and different parts of the world started getting involved in the payment system, and they were one of the first to move to Europe and Latin America, Caribbean, and utilizing this buyer wall technology, which made acquiring banks feel a lot more secure in doing business with some of the smaller merchants and micro merchants. They created aggregator accounts, which, obviously PayPal and Square became famous for, but they were one of the first companies to do that. And frankly, at that particular point in time, even today, some of these aggregation accounts are not considered fully legal because you're commingling funds.
Did they start out the same way? Did they start out just going door to door, selling payment processing solutions, selling the hardware, selling the whole full service of being able to run payments? And then they collected it. So this is really is this a sort of aggregation acquisition as the market consolidates?
Yes, it's a technology acquisition too. These are people that actually had to go out and convince merchants to accept credit cards, and it's phenomenal that today we don't have to talk about that. I grew up in that era. I had to go out and convince restaurants that were in airports to accept credit cards. It sounds bizarre, but I'd be sitting there sometimes 3 visits saying, there's a guy that came in with a credit card, couldn't buy a steak. I don't want to do that. I'll take cash. I'll take checks. And I go, well, you got a hot check here. I mean, how many you got? I remember walking into this old airport and where it was somewhere in the Midwest, and a guy had 14 checks taped to the wall of bad actors. And I said, how many more checks do you have in a drawer? And he opens up a drawer and had 175 bad checks.
Just people writing just pieces of paper that don't mean anything.
There was no other way to pay. People were hungry. He thought that the guy was good for it, but he didn't want to sign up for credit cards because he didn't need it. So those were the days. And today everybody's like, well, everybody just accepts credit cards. Well, taking a lot for granted. There's a lot we learned about psychology in that era.
So let me ask you, Brian, what do you think a company like this would be acquired for? They didn't announce the public price. EPX is a portfolio that exceeds $18 billion in processing. What's the going rate?
Well, it's funny. If it was in the Silicon Valley, I would almost have to say it would be a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. Just simply on those numbers,
really?
because this is not Silicon Valley, it's Wilmington, Delaware, and Flint, Michigan, right? And everybody's yawning already, and a bunch have the pedigree to be mentioned on TechCrunch, right? So it's probably a few $1 million, and probably more likely a way for the existing employees and executives at EPX to continue doing what they've done since 1979, and to do it with a lot more capitalization and a lot more of a bigger stage. And we're going to see a lot of this. I got to tell you that underneath the ocean in this iceberg, there are trillions of dollars in these small and medium-sized processing entities that are going to start making more and more sense. They've acquired merchants that are exceedingly loyal. As a guy that used to sell in this industry very aggressively and had to sell against some of these companies, even North American, if a merchant is sold the right way and with legitimate reasoning, with ethics, and done the way sales should be done, there is loyalty that is beyond compare.
Right.
Merchants will not leave. And I don't care how much you talk about price or anything like that, as long as the person's not being quote unquote ripped off, and they know it, they're not going anywhere. And that's why startups who are in payments always will hit a wall unless they understand this logic. And they say, well, younger businesses. No, it happens to all businesses. You see merchants. I talked to a merchant 2 weeks ago that started off with Square day one. I mean, he was probably one of the first.
And now he feels the allegiance to it.
No. This is the unfortunate part, because there's no human contact, because there's no interaction, because there's no real brand building. Guess where he is right now? It becomes easier. It becomes easier to pull it, to rip it right out. His lunch truck became so famous.
Depends who you are,
so
though, Brian.
popular.
I mean, some merchants just, I personally don't feel if I have a relationship with any company, like I'm not going to stay because of that relationship. It always is a business decision. But I could see where people do fall into that demographic of having
a lot of the practical and pragmatic merchants really operate on a different set of theories on how they work.
Absolutely.
Certainly
And I don't
financial
believe,
works,
I read a post yesterday by Jason Limkin, and it really convinced me that I shouldn't think of customers as thinking like myself. It was, as a quick aside, it was why do a lot of companies have to contact me instead of to sign up now and get started? It's just 85% of people want to be contacted by a person, and I just when I read that, it just was like, wow, really, that's kind of surprising.
Let me tell you, it's a humbling experience when you wake up in the real world. And it's funny, even the most incredibly brilliant founders in the Bay Area and around the country even, brilliant products, brilliant teams. The wake up in the world of the practical and pragmatic merchant is so humbling. You wake up in a world where people are making decisions not on your logic. And, Jason's a brilliant guy. I mean, with his, acquisition to, Adobe and, it's just incredible.
At the end of the day, it really is about people. But yeah, I love touching on subjects like this that are kind of out of the limelight with this and Topology, maybe a little bit less so with Topology, but particularly these are a little hidden treasure trove. So I think this is a fantastic episode. Thank you guys both for dropping knowledge on everyone, and look forward to the next time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care.
All right, guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.